Let's take a look at another example. If alpha is acute and cosine of 2 alpha equals 3/4, find the values of A cosine of alpha and B sine of alpha. So how do we approach something like this? Well, let's first take a look at this first fact. Cosine of 2 alpha equals 3/4. And let's see what kind of information I can get from that. So we're going to look at some of my identities. Remember, there are 3 of them for cosine of 2 times an angle. One of them had sine and cosine, but the other 2 had just one of my trig ratios present. So I'm going to focus on one of those since that's going to give me a distinct answer. So actually, let's pick the identity cosine of 2 alpha equals 2 cosine squared of alpha minus 1. So I'm going to harp on this one because then I could just solve for alpha in here since there's a cosine of alpha in here. So I know that cosine of 2 alpha equals, let's change the color here, cosine of 2 alpha equals 3/4. So that's going to equal 2 cosine squared of alpha minus 1. Let's add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to add a 4/4 to both sides. So that means that 7/4 equals 2 cosine squared of alpha. I'll divide both sides by 2, or let's think of this as multiply by 1/2. So that means that 7/8 is going to equal 2 cosine, or just actually cosine squared of alpha. And I'm going to take the square root of both sides to find the cosine of alpha. So let's jump up here. That means that the cosine of alpha is going to equal positive or negative square root of 7 over 2 root 2, once I simplify the square root of 8. Now we can just leave the radical 2 in the denominator. I'm fine with that. Now addressing the positive or negative, I am told that alpha is acute. So that's going to actually narrow down whether or not this is positive or negative. That means I'm going to be in the first quadrant. So that means that this is going to be, or I guess, yeah, like this, from my perspective, like this from your perspective. That means that I'm going to have a quadrant 1 angle. Cosine is positive. So that means I just have a positive cosine. All right, so I'm given the cosine of alpha. That's done. Hey, look at that. We got one. There's my cosine of alpha. How am I going to find the sine of alpha? Well, really, we're going to use the same process. So now let's go to another color here, and we'll do the same process, but finding the sine of alpha. So cosine of 2 alpha is going to equal 1 minus 2 times the sine squared of alpha. So 3/4 will equal 1 minus 2 sine squared of alpha. I'll subtract 1 from both sides, so this time I'll have a negative 1/4 equals negative 2 sine squared of alpha. I'll multiply both sides by negative 1/2 again, so I'll have a positive 1/8. 1/8 equals sine squared of alpha. I'll take the square root of both sides. So that means that the sine of alpha is going to equal 1 over 2 root 2. And again, alpha is acute, so this is going to be a positive sign value, and there I've done it. So using those different trig identities to find my cosine of alpha, a different trig identity to find the sine of alpha. Why don't you try this example, very similar, pause the video, give this one a shot. And here are my solutions. Here's the solution to letter A and letter B.